The most dangerous weapon you can hand your children isn't a loaded gun. It's a perfectly executed, legally binding inheritance. Listen to them. Two little boys, maybe 7 and 9 years old, chasing each other through a backyard sprinkler. Their laughter is so loud it practically vibrates. They are sunburnt. They are breathless. They are completely inseparable. Now, fast forward exactly 32 years. The sprinkler is gone. The backyard is sold. In its place is a sterile, glass-walled conference room on the 45th floor of a downtown law firm. The air is so heavy with hostility you can barely take a full breath. Those same two boys, now grown men with wives and newborns of their own, are sitting on opposite sides of a massive mahogany table. They absolutely refuse to make eye contact. They communicate only through men in $1,000 suits who bill by the hour. This is not a story about greed. This is a story about the devastating illusion of the perfect legacy. As new parents, we spend our most exhausted, sleep-deprived years sacrificing everything to build a safety net for our kids. We stockpile college funds, we build businesses, we invest in real estate. We obsessively baby-proof the house, research the safest car seats, and vet the best schools. We are consumed with protecting our children from the outside world. And we do it all with a singular, desperate hope, that when we are gone, our wealth will protect them. That it will keep them safe. That it will keep them together. But the impending transfer of generational wealth rarely acts as a glue. More often than not, it acts as a wedge. When the patriarch of this family passed away, he thought he was leaving behind an unbreakable dynasty. Instead, he left behind a detonator. The millions of dollars didn't erase their problems. Because money never actually solves family trauma. It just acts as a highly volatile accelerant. It takes every unspoken slight, every perceived childhood injustice, every quiet resentment that has been simmering under the floorboards for decades, and it sets them entirely on fire. Within 6 months of the reading of the will, the brothers' wives were no longer speaking. Within a year, the cousins were banned from attending the same birthday parties. The family ecosystem was completely, irrevocably destroyed, reduced to mountains of aggressive legal paperwork and bitter, agonizing depositions. You might look at this wreckage and think this could never happen to your kids. You tell yourself that you are raising siblings who love each other, who will always protect each other. But the architects of this particular disaster thought the exact same thing. They assumed the bonds forged in the sandbox were invincible. They didn't realize that when you introduce massive financial stakes, shifting power dynamics, and the fierce protective instincts of new spouses, childhood loyalty can crumble with terrifying speed. But what was the exact moment the sprinkler turned into a battlefield? It wasn't a multi-million-dollar check. It was a single, seemingly harmless conversation at a Sunday dinner 30 years ago, a conversation you are probably having with your own children right now. Think back to when those boys were just 7 and 9. Imagine a typical Sunday evening. The family is gathered around the dinner table. One boy is proudly showing off a perfect report card, the other is staring at his plate, having just been caught breaking a neighbor's window. The parents, desperate to keep the peace, do what any loving, exhausted parent does. They praise the older boy, but quickly pivot to shield the younger one. They overcompensate. They offer the younger brother an extra scoop of ice cream to soothe his bruised ego. They divide their attention not based on merit, but on the desperate need to keep the emotional scales perfectly balanced. They call it fairness. But children are brilliant, ruthless observers. They don't see fairness. They see a transaction. In that single, seemingly harmless moment at the dinner table, an invisible ledger is opened. And it is a ledger that will remain open for the next 3 decades. This is the silent tragedy of the modern family. As parents, we are absolutely terrified of showing favoritism. We obsess over making sure every Christmas tree has the exact same number of presents underneath it. We measure the ounces of milk in the sippy cups to avoid a tantrum. But when we confuse mathematical equality with emotional fairness, we accidentally train our children to become accountants of our affection. We teach them to keep score. For 30 years, these two brothers kept a meticulous, silent score. The older brother, the high achiever, spent his entire youth doing everything perfectly. He followed the rules, got the grades, and joined the family business. Yet, he watched his parents constantly pour their emotional bandwidth and financial safety nets into the younger brother, who drifted from job to job, perpetually needing to be rescued. The older brother felt he was paying a permanent tax for his own competence. The younger brother, meanwhile, felt entirely suffocated. He spent his life standing in a towering, inescapable shadow. Every time his parents offered help, it felt like a heavy, suffocating reminder of his own inadequacy. He didn't feel loved, he felt pitied. On the surface, they were the picture-perfect American family. They still spent Thanksgivings together. They gave heartfelt toasts at each other's weddings. The resentment was entirely invisible, buried deep beneath forced smiles and matching holiday pajamas. But a ledger always demands to be balanced. Eventually, the bill comes due. When the patriarch of the family finally sat down with his estate attorney, he looked at his legacy and made a fatal miscalculation. He looked at his two grown sons and saw the boys in the sprinkler. He completely ignored the complex, messy men they had actually become. Desperate to prove he loved them equally, he instructed his lawyers to split the family business and the sprawling real estate portfolio exactly down the middle. 50-50. Co-COS. Co-trustees. He believed he was giving them the ultimate gift of equality. The parents thought their estate plan would keep the brothers tied together forever, forcing them to collaborate. Instead, they had just handed them a loaded weapon. And the person who was about to pull the trigger wasn't the brother who felt slighted, it was the one who got exactly what he wanted. When the grief begins to clear, the logistics take over. The flowers at the funeral wither, the distant relatives fly back home, and the brothers are finally left alone with the keys to the kingdom. This is the exact moment the trap snaps shut. The father's 50-50 split was a romantic, naive fantasy. In the brutal reality of running an empire, 50-50 is not a compromise. 50-50 is a permanent stalemate. It is a corporate structure that requires absolute, harmonious consensus to make even the smallest operational decision. There is no tiebreaker. There is no final authority. For the older brother, this structure was a profound, deeply personal betrayal. He had spent 15 years grinding in the trenches of the family business. He had missed his own anniversaries. He had worked weekends to double the company's bottom line, operating under the quiet assumption that his decades of sweat equity would inevitably be rewarded with complete control. For the younger brother, the inheritance was a sudden, intoxicating validation. It was legal, ironclad proof from his late father that he was finally an equal. And he was absolutely determined to exercise his newfound power to prove he belonged. Every single business decision instantly became a proxy war for their childhood. Approving a quarterly budget wasn't about the math, it was about who had the right to make the rules. Hiring a new vendor wasn't a strategic choice, it was a test of dominance. The unresolved emotional ledger from that Sunday dinner table 30 years ago was now dictating a multi-million-dollar corporate balance sheet. And then, the most volatile element of all was added to the mix. Both brothers had just become fathers themselves. When you hold your own newborn, your biology entirely rewires itself. Your protective instincts go into overdrive. Suddenly, this dispute wasn't just about their bruised childhood egos anymore. It was about their own children's inheritance. It was about survival. Behind closed doors, the whispers began. The older brother's wife, exhausted by the crushing stress her husband was carrying home every night, finally said what he was too guilty to say: "You built this company. Why should your children's financial future subsidize his incompetence?" Across town, the younger brother's wife was fiercely defending her family's newly acquired territory. "Your father named you as a co-CEO. It is your birthright. Do not let him bully you out of what belongs to our kids. The wedge had been driven straight through the heart of the family. The cousins abruptly stopped having playdates. Thanksgiving dinners were quietly cancelled. The legacy that was meant to provide generational security had mutated into a massive, existential threat to both of their households. The stalemate quickly paralyzed the company. Revenue started bleeding out. Desperate, the brothers stopped speaking to one another entirely and brought in the litigators. The glass-walled conference room became their new permanent address. The lawyers thought this was a standard, if messy, asset division. They didn't realize they were actually litigating a 30-year-old childhood grievance. And just as the mediation seemed entirely hopeless, a hidden clause was discovered in the family trust, a secret stipulation that guaranteed neither brother could walk away intact. The hidden clause was buried deep in the trust documents, practically invisible until a paralegal unearthed it on a Tuesday afternoon. It was a forced liquidation mandate. A poison pill. The father, perhaps anticipating a brief period of friction, had instructed his attorneys to build in a fail-safe. The clause dictated that if his sons could not reach a unanimous operational agreement within 12 months of his passing, the entire estate, the business, the properties, the legacy, would be seized by a court-appointed trustee, completely dismantled, and sold off to the highest bidder. He thought the threat of mutually assured destruction would force them to the table. He thought the sheer financial terror of losing the family empire would make them compromise. He deeply underestimated the power of a 30-year-old grudge. When the ultimatum was laid out on that mahogany table, neither brother backed down. Instead of a reality check, the clause became a countdown timer. And rather than surrender a single inch of emotional ground, they both made the exact same, devastating choice. They chose scorched earth. If the older brother couldn't exclusively control the company he built, he was perfectly willing to watch it die. If the younger brother couldn't be respected as an equal, he was thrilled to burn it all to the ground just to spite the man who always made him feel small. The litigation quickly mutated into a blood sport. They weaponized everything. Forensic accountants were hired to ruthlessly audit a decade of each other's personal expenses. Depositions devolved into vicious screaming matches about perceived slights that happened in high school. They weren't fighting for money anymore. They were fighting for absolute, undisputed vengeance. And as the war raged in the downtown boardrooms, the most horrific casualties were quietly piling up in the nurseries. This is the part that should keep you awake at night. The brothers were so entirely consumed by their crusade that they didn't realize they were actively cursing their own children. The cousins, who shared the same blood, the same last name, and the same innocent potential, were completely severed from one another. Playdates were replaced by strict orders to never speak to that side of the family. First birthday invitations were returned to sender, unopened. The toddlers who should have been making memories in their own backyard sprinklers were instead being groomed into a brand new generation of soldiers. The brothers were taking the exact trauma that destroyed their lives and surgically implanting it into their kids. They were handing down a heavy, toxic inheritance of pure hatred. By month 11, the family business was entirely paralyzed. Top-tier clients fled. The real estate portfolio was frozen in probate hell. And the accounts that were supposed to guarantee the next generation's college tuitions and first mortgages were being drained at a rate of $10,000 a day by men in tailored suits. The millions were almost completely gone, swallowed whole by relentless legal fees and pure spite. But the true tragedy wasn't the evaporation of the family fortune. It was the terrifying realization of what their parents' money had actually bought them, a realization that only hit home when the judge handed down the final, devastating verdict. The gavel fell with a dull, hollow thud. The 12-month deadline had officially expired. True to the father's hidden clause, the judge ordered the immediate, complete liquidation of the family empire. The business was swallowed up by a faceless private equity firm for a fraction of its true value. The childhood homes, the sprawling real estate, the entire physical history of their family, all of it was auctioned off to total strangers. After the liquidators, the court trustees, and the armies of ruthless attorneys finally took their cuts, the brothers were handed their final settlement checks. They were mathematically equal. And they were virtually worthless. They walked out of the courthouse through separate doors. They would never speak to each other again. The father tried to use his wealth to mandate their love. He believed his money could magically force a reconciliation. Instead, it funded a war that guaranteed his grandchildren would grow up as total strangers, passing each other on the street without ever knowing they shared the same blood. If you are listening to this, perhaps watching your own children sleep, you need to understand that a truly successful legacy requires far more than a well-funded trust account. It requires the profound courage to look at your family objectively. You must ruthlessly separate your financial planning from your emotional validation. Stop trying to prove you love your children equally through a blind, 50-50 split. Fairness and equality are rarely the same thing. If one child is a fierce entrepreneur and the other is a free-spirited creative, do not force them to co-pilot a high-stakes corporate machine. Structure your legacy to fit who your children actually are, not the idealized, identical versions of them you wish they were. If one earns the business, make the other whole with a completely different asset class. Give them autonomy. Cut the strings. Most importantly, you must eliminate the element of surprise. The dramatic reading of a will should never be the very first time your children hear about their future. Sit them down today. Explain the math. Explain the brutal realities of your decisions. Let them be angry with you while you are still alive to absorb the impact and guide the conversation. Do not leave them to project a lifetime of unspoken anger onto each other when you are in the ground. Because if you leave an emotional void, your money will not heal it. Your money will simply fill it with poison. You will spend your entire life building a legacy, sacrificing your time and energy to give your children the world. But if you don't dismantle the silent resentments hiding in your own home today, you have to ask yourself, will your greatest gift be the exact thing that tears their world apart?